Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. Rob Ellis, Bill Colarulo hanging out with you. Tone will be hopping on a little bit later. But we're joined right now, host from 94 WIP. You can hear him weekends, Saturday and Sunday at 10 a.m. with Mike Sealski and Jody McDonald. You can also follow him on Twitter/X at Real Glen Macnow. And I love the headshot that you're using on your Twitter account, Glenn. Little Ben Franklin thing going on there. Glen Macnow, what's up, my man?
Ben and I are merely a few years apart in age, so, good, Rob. How are you?
We're doing well. We're doing well, Glenn. I want to pick up on a conversation, and I know you heard bits and pieces as well that Bill and I were just having. I'm going to start with the head coach. Do you feel like his job's in jeopardy? Does it swing on how poor this game could look potentially Monday night, or do you think he's safe?
Kind of in the middle. I don't think he's safe. I think if they get blown out and embarrass themselves as they did in the last two games, that he's out. I think if they play respectably and lose, something we never would have been thinking is possible a month ago, that he survives the job. I think most likely Lurie really doesn't want to have to fire him. You don't want to have a new coach search every 3 years, and it shows your organization is unstable. And I know there's a lot of good candidates out there, but it's always a risk when you bring in somebody new. So I would say short of disaster, he's back.
Yeah, and one of the things with Sirianni that I always thought he was so good at was building a strong culture, having that locker room be really close-knit and together. And what we've seen over the last few weeks is it appears that there's cracks in the foundation of this culture. Do you believe that there's something going on that we don't know about in that locker room, some sort of rift between the players or the coaching staff?
Oh, yeah, I think that's become pretty apparent. And, Bill, one of the things you learn over time is that when things fall apart, they can fall apart fast, and that it's all really tenuous. It's fragile. Any team culture is fragile. And when you lose 5 out of 6 and you embarrass yourself and guys are getting hurt, and I think that shows itself to really be the case. I do believe there is, and people in Philadelphia will know what I mean by this, I think there's definitely a Jeff McClain story that's going to come out sometime soon at the end of the year that's going to have this and that. I was listening to Jeff McClain question the coach yesterday. It was a really odd question about, what do you and Jalen Hurts talk about when it's not football? And, you guys know the PR department gets the coach ready for every possible question that can come up. They didn't get him ready for this. And Nick's answer was really, well, we talk about football. And it really, on its face, and I don't want to read too much into it, but certainly on its face, it suggested there's some kind of communication issue between the coach and the quarterback. So we'll learn as it goes along. Stuff comes out when you lose, and I think we're going to learn something pretty big.
Yeah, and you look at it, Glenn, and the way they've fallen off, like Bill and I were talking about this earlier. Like I thought there was just such a good leadership council there. I thought he had such a pulse for everything that we wouldn't see all this kind of stuff. And really, maybe the first sign of it was the Desai Patricia thing, and that felt desperate to me. And you look at it since then, the defense has really fallen off. And not that it was great, believe me. Desai wasn't reminding anybody of Jim Johnson, but I mean, it's gotten markedly worse.
Yeah, that's proven to be just an utter disaster. It's shown itself to be what I think we thought it was, which was a panic move, and it has gone from horrible to whatever's 5 leagues below horrible. We'll get into whatever detail you want, but when the New York Giants dictate that on the first 2 plays of the game, the guy who's one of the best pass rushers in the league gets dropped into coverage, well, that's just, things are getting horrible. And let me say one more thing about the culture that's interesting. And my partner Mike Sealski pointed this out to me. So when they had the horrible ending against Seattle, and Nick took the bullet for the team and said, well, yeah, sure, on that play, we were hoping for pass interference, which nobody bought.
Right. But
when A.J. Brown came out and spoke, he praised Nick for taking a bullet for the team. He said, yeah, Jalen and I improvised that. We appreciate the coach taking a bullet for the team. And then reporters went to Jalen and kind of offered him that same opportunity. And Jalen didn't say, yeah, we did that. Jalen just kind of said, huh, and didn't back his coach. Again, I don't want to read too much into, as Hurts said yesterday, what you guys don't know, you don't know. But certainly they are giving the appearance of serious cracks in the wall.
I agree. Like he would have had every opportunity to sort of do what AJ did, where, hey, I appreciate Nick saying that. That's on us. We got to fix it. And just, you could keep it moving pretty quickly. But it was sort of like, yeah, you don't know what you don't. Okay, well, what don't we know? Because AJ Brown just said you ad-libbed it. So which is it? And I think AJ, in trying, Glenn, 2 weeks, whatever it was now, last week, trying to set everything straight, came off sincere and genuine, in my opinion. However, there were sort of like veiled shots taken, not really intended. In other words, it's like if they're ad-libbing that play, do you really respect what's coming in from either Brian Johnson or Nick? No, you don't, clearly.
Yeah.
So
clearly.
A lot going on there for sure.
It all looks so good at 10-1, Bill.
You know, we say that now, but when you look back in hindsight, Glenn, there were obvious signs. This team was trying to tell us who they were for 11 games, and we kept saying, well, they find ways to win. They find ways to win. But there was problems, and you mentioned Jalen Hurts, and a lot of people blame Brian Johnson and Nick Sirianni for this offense, and I do think they share a majority of the responsibility. But what's going on with Jalen? Because he doesn't look like the same player he was last season. He is turning the ball over at an alarming rate this year. Do you think he's taken a step back, or do you think it's a guy who doesn't have faith in his coaching staff?
Yes to the first, and most likely to the second. I also think that, again, stories that are going to come out at the end of the year, we're going to learn that he was more hurt than they ever let on, and that the injury really hurt him. I think a big part of the step back is apparent, right? The stats show it. Your eyes show it. I mean, it's clear that he's not the player he was last year. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the league last year. Now he's kind of middle of the pack. And this relates to the offense and the coaching. The offense worked so well last year because you had first of all, you had a lot of talent at receiver, at running back, etc. But you had an offense that was predicated on the threat of the quarterback running, and he would do it. And you would do the RPOs, and sometimes he would run, and sometimes he would pass, and the defense was guessing the whole time. Now, you take away the running threat that he is, but you keep the offense the same. Remember, Nick came out a couple of weeks ago and said, he was kind of defending Brian Johnson, but he said, like, yeah, this is my offense. It's the same offense we run since I've come here. And I'm thinking, aha, that's part of the problem.
Yep.
Other teams have kind of figured it out, and you haven't evolved. And if you're running an offense predicated on a running quarterback who can't run, it's not going to work. I think that's a big part of it, Bill.
Yeah, but you know what bothers me? Sorry, Rob, but you know what bothers me about that is I agree with you to a certain extent, but then let's go back to the Cardinals game. Last drive of the game, you need a touchdown there. You're on the 20-yard line. And if Jalen Hurts was too hurt to run, well, why are you calling designed runs to Jalen Hurts that have no pass option built in? So now you've made your offense one-dimensional because you're just calling a straight quarterback run with no pass option off of it. Because I agree, what made this offense so dominant last year was that defenses had to defend not only Jalen Hurts, but he could hand it to the running back, or he could pull it and throw it to one of those really good wide receivers. So that's what's bothered me, the designed quarterback runs with no pass option if this is a guy who can't run because he's injured. It just doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense, and I agree with you. And I saw a stat, it was a couple weeks ago, but the Eagles had, I think, the second most designed quarterback run of any team in the league. But it is clear to all of us, right, that he is not the runner he was last season. Definitely. But they're still going with it. They haven't changed the offense.
And doesn't it feel like, just, Glenn, that's been the MO the whole time? It's like there's almost an arrogance and a stubborn to a faultness. I mean, where they won't change anything. I don't get it offensively. I just don't
Rob,
get it.
We've seen coaches come through this town who made great first impressions or had a great first year or so, and then the league caught on. I mean, I'll go way back, and I remember Ray Rhodes came in and was coach of the year in his first year, and Ray's whole thing was less strategy than it was motivation, and he got
punch
the boys
him in the
going.
mouth, yeah,
and it really worked until it kind of didn't work, right? You hear the same locker room speech 100 times, it wears thin. And then you had Chip Kelly. Remember that first game against Washington? Incredible. Where it's like, oh my God, we got the next Bill Walsh, and this guy's going to revolutionize the league. And for a while it worked until other teams realized, like, yeah, he's just trying to go really fast and we can do this. And I fear, I hope I'm wrong, but I fear Nick's kind of the same thing, which is, hey, it's the same in any sport, right? You get a baseball, you get a hitter comes up and he hits 400 the first time around, and it's like, oh my God, we got the next Hall of Famer, and then pitchers kind of catch on, and he's got to adjust. So Nick's got to adjust, and to date he has not. Maybe we see it Monday.
How would you describe Hurts' season? I mean, if you look at the numbers, in some ways, damn good. He scored a lot of touchdowns, passing yards, etc. But you also look at the turnovers and you cringe. It has felt off to me all year with him, and maybe that's more of an offensive big picture. But how would you describe his year?
Much more valuable in a fantasy realm than in the NFL world. The touchdowns and the one thing that works is the tush push, right? So he's got 15 rushing touchdowns this year, I think, something like that, tied a record, because that one play works, and they can do that whenever they want. And how many of his touchdowns are on that? 8, 10, 12?
A good amount. Yep.
Right. Sure. But it is a definite down year. Yeah. You assume that he is going to get a good rest and get healed in the off season, get better coaching. We can get into the coordinators if you want. Brian Johnson's been a disappointment, and come back next year. I think the talent's there, and I think the drive is there. He's just having a bad year.
You're spot on about Hurts being a good fantasy quarterback. He was my fantasy quarterback, man. Almost
there you
brought
go.
to a championship.
Yeah.
But let's jump over to the other side for a second. Let's talk about the defense, because this defense didn't do a lot of things well in the beginning of the season, but the one thing they did really well was stop the run. Best rushing defense in the league for 9 games. And you go back to week 3, did a great job shutting down the Bucs team. But over the last 8, they're getting dominated in the running game. Over 100 yards by every single team. I think they're averaging over 130. What the hell happened to this rushing defense?
It's a great question. I don't know that I have the answer for that. I mean, I can't believe Zach Cunningham's worth all that. I mean, the back 7 is really weak, but it's by and large the same back 7 you had at the start of the year. Bill, I don't have a good answer for that.
One thing that we do the game day shows here on JAKIB with Seth Joyner, and as good as they were in the beginning of the year, I got to give Seth credit, because what he kept saying was this team cannot stop the run if they're not in a 5-man front. Their linebackers aren't good enough to stop the run when they're not in a 5-man front. The problem is you come out in a 5-man front, it exposes you even more in the passing game. So they couldn't do that very often. And I think teams caught up and said, hey, you're not going to be in a 5-man front. We're going to just pound the ball against you.
All right, so that makes sense, and Seth always makes a lot of sense. But I think the other part of that, and I hate this excuse, but I do think it's part of it, is they're exhausted. Yeah. They don't have the depth this year that they had last year. I think the defensive line is kind of fried. You see that in the lack of sacks, which ties to a lot of things, but the fact that the defensive line isn't getting any sacks anymore. I think they're beat. I think they're tired. You can say it's because they played those extra games last year, but I hate that as an excuse, because you're supposed to do that. But I do think part of it is they're just out of gas.
Do you think, Glenn, I'm basing this off of the Jordan Davis thing, where our colleague Howard Eskin said he's being fined every week because he's overweight. And we see, Brian Baldinger breaking the film down, saying he's basically giving you nothing out there because he's exhausted. He's laying on guys. Are they too lenient? Like, I get the resting guys, and they had all 22 starters in the Super Bowl. Hard to argue any of that. But is there not enough accountability in your estimation that's going on? Are they almost too buddy or too hands off with some things?
I can't answer that because I don't know what Nick's doing behind closed doors. And if they're finding him, they're finding him. I mean, there's a maximum you can fine a guy, and it's not going to impact his retirement account. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if they are. I think I want to point some of the blame here at Howie for not having the defensive depth that this team needed. We know that they've always minimized the role of linebackers and safeties. So we kind of get that. But when TJ Edwards is one of the top tackling guys in the NFL, I'm trying to think who else somebody else. J. Gardner Johnson got hurt this year.
6 interceptions last year.
Yeah, he was really valuable part of the defense last year. You make priorities and you let those guys go, and that really bit him in the butt.
Yeah, Howie Roseman, you talked about arrogance with the offense. I thought it was arrogant on Howie Roseman's part to think that they would be able to replace that much young talent on the defensive side of the football when you have not been good at drafting defensive players. You look back at the last 5 years. Don't count this year. These rookies, maybe they have a promising career, but they're rookies. There's nobody on that defensive side of the football that Howie Roseman drafted outside of a couple of D tackles that are giving you anything this season. Everybody's been brought in either via trade, free agency, guys you had to bring in the middle of training camp. And I just thought it was arrogant on Howie Roseman's part to think, okay, we're going to let guys like TJ Edwards, a young player that you actually did develop, Marcus Epps, a young player you actually did develop, and just let them walk in free agency and think you're going to be able to replace these guys. And I agree with you. I think that's the problem you see on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and the guys they brought in mid-season this year have been helping them. Bayer did nothing. I got to admit, I was kind of excited when they brought him in based on his resume. Figured, okay, this is a guy who, you know, they're paying for him, but he's going to help. He's done absolutely nothing for him out there. Yeah.
So, Glenn, let me ask you.
I'm sorry, Shaq Leonard also.
Yeah, they just look cooked. Yeah. There's a reason they were available. Yeah.
We were just about to say the same thing. There was a reason that.
Yeah, I mean, Shaq Leonard, the Colts were still in playoff contention. He was a hero there for the first 4 years of his career. You're not letting that guy walk for kicks. You know,
you talk about letting them. You talk about letting them walk. I mean, look at the safety position. There was a reason why Mike Tomlin said, "Okay, Terrell Edmonds started for us for 5 years, but we'll let you guys sign him on a 1-year deal." Yeah. There was a reason why Justin Evans was available. As talented as he was coming out of Texas A&M, the kid hasn't stayed healthy since 2018. You brought him in. Where's he now? On IR. So you neglected these positions, and it came back to haunt us in a big way.
Yeah, except that the weird thing is sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, right? They brought in Bradbury last year on a similar kind of thing. I mean, the Super Bowl year, they brought in, what was his name, Peterson, the cornerback, who ended up being a hero in the postseason.
Johnson, I think. Patrick Johnson.
No,
not Patrick Johnson. What was his name?
Robinson.
Patrick Robinson. Yeah, he had the pick 6 against the Vikings.
Vikings.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, he had a terrific season. Remember, he almost got cut out of training.
Well, Howie nailed every one of them that year. I mean, Blunt, Chris Long, Nick Foles. We could go on and on and on.
So sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. The problem with Howie is it seems like 1 year everybody works and the next year nobody works. And this is unfortunately the second one.
Yeah. Let me ask you about the Bucks game because Bill and I were talking about it a little earlier. You know, it seems like when you ask people to look at the matchup, mostly everybody says, well, the Bucks stink. They're not really focusing on the Eagles as much. It's sort of a deflection move, which I get. It's going to make you feel better about yourself if that's the case. But how do you view this game, Glenn?
I don't think the Bucks stink. I think the Bucks are a very average team. They do a couple things well. And the couple things they do well don't bode well for the Eagles. They have two outstanding wide receivers, and Mayfield, assuming that his ankle is okay and he's going to play, is having a very good year. I mean, we think of him as Baker Mayfield bust, but he's having a good year for them. He's rebounded well. And they blitz a lot. And I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but the Eagles haven't done well against the blitz recently and seem to have no clue whatsoever against the Giants how to defend the blitz. The Bucks, I noticed with the Bucks, they're toward the top of the league in sacks, but they don't have anybody with double-digit sacks. They just have a lot of different guys coming from a lot of different directions. And all of that scares me. This Monday, it's in there for the Eagles. I think the Eagles are the more talented team. So if they can somehow find it, they can win the game. But there's been no evidence over the last month that the Eagles are going to be able to find it.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, there's a lot of guys, Vita Vea, you know, and here, that's the other thing that's kind of driven me crazy this year, Glenn. When I ask people about why they've been so bad against the blitz, it's like, well, or I'm sorry, on the other side of the ball, when the Eagles haven't been able to get home, they say, well, the other team's getting the ball out quick. Okay, what are you doing to counter that?
Yeah,
and weren't they trying to get the ball out quick last year when you had 70 sacks?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's been the problem, I think, with Nick Sirianni. The philosophy on both sides of the football is explosive plays on offense. Don't give up the big play on defense, and that's why they're letting these teams go on these methodical drives. And it's why on offense you see Jalen Hurts time and time again forcing the ball downfield because that's the philosophy of Sirianni, that big plays win games. So you're going to take your shots on offense, and you're going to do everything to stop the big play on defense, and teams are just picking you apart.
Yeah, it's the philosophy that goes even above Sirianni. It's an organizational philosophy and has been for a while. And Nick doesn't disagree with it, but Nick wouldn't have been hired if he didn't agree with it. Just one other thing about the blitz, and this I could not understand last week when Jalen Hurts gets blitzed, and every time he rolls out to the right and throws it away. I mean, how many we saw that? Whatever,
it's
however
a fade roll. It's a roll fade, and then yeah.
and then
Yep.
just throws it away. How he and Dallas Goedert have been playing together for 3 seasons, and there's not a sense at the line of scrimmage that the Giants are about to send somebody, just look at me, I'm going to hit you on a slant, and we'll just gash him to death. It seems the easiest. I think a high school coach would have been able to devise a way to try to stop that giant blitz. I mean, it's Wink Martindale. What did you think was going to happen?
Right. And what do you think Todd Bowles is going to do?
Yeah, and they never had a strategy at the beginning of the game, nor adapted during the game.
Yeah, I just and Glenn, that's what I keep getting back to, really, on both sides of the ball. They've been very poorly coached.
Yeah.
Like, and I know people will say 11 wins and all that, but man, if you're watching, your eyes are open. You're seeing a team on both sides of the ball that's not prepared for
11 wins is 11 wins is history. 11 wins is a decade ago. I mean, at least it feels like. So, do you think it's possible? I'll ask you guys, because I really think they don't want to fire Nick.
I think they don't as well. Yeah.
So, do we have another season where we get 2 new coordinators?
I think that's where it's headed, Glenn. I honestly do. Like, I think the whole thing on defense is going to be wiped. Like, I don't think you're going to see Patricia or Desai.
No.
Johnson, I don't know. I mean, they can hang their hat on numbers. Nick did it yesterday. You referenced Nick's. He wanted to tell you how great they are, and okay, but they may do that. But I think you may see total, and it's usually a sign of real desperation when both coordinators are bounced. But I think you may see that.
I would tell you, other than Jeff Stoutland and the guy who surprised me this year, Michael Clay, the special teams coach, who would have thought special teams was the one that would have the good year?
The one thing you don't worry about going into this game.
Yeah.
Yep.
Other than those, I don't know that any coach is coming back. So, I mean, Tracy Rocker, the defensive line coach, has had a terrible year. I don't need to bring these guys back.
No.
And you just mentioned Jeff Stoutland. Obviously, the guy's a legend, great offensive line coach. But doesn't it surprise you a little that they don't have answers for the blitz when you have a guy like Jeff Stoutland in the room helping you game plan for these offensive games?
It does. And I guess I have so much faith in Jeff Stoutland that I think part of the story at the end of the year is going to be what they didn't do when they didn't listen to Jeff Stoutland.
Yeah.
I have more faith in him than anybody in that room, for sure.
Yeah, he's proven it time and time again. He's a great offensive line coach. It's just been a surprise.
Yeah.
All right. But before we get you out of here, Glenn, I did want to mix in some hockey here, because the news came down this week. The Cutter Gauthier got traded. The Flyers get Jamie Drysdale back, a second-round pick in 2025. But this whole thing was weird. I mean, just weird from the jump. And he tells them initially, hey, I'm on board. I want to be a Flyer. Boom, he's excited.
I was born to be a Flyer.
Born to be a Flyer. He's throwing the jersey on draft night, the whole, all right, here we go. And then I remember asking Al Morgani about this in the summer. I'm like, what's going on? He's like, something's off with this guy. Something's up. And he didn't quite have it locked down exactly what was going on. And then we come to find out, like, he basically ghosted the organization, Glenn. And then yesterday he's on a podcast with the Anaheim Ducks, one of their people. And he says things, but he doesn't really, like, I just realized over the last year and a half, I needed to speak up and speak my mind and move on. Like, and still no explanation. It's like, dude, at least have the balls to say what it is.
Yeah. And so we can only guess. And then there's been talk that one of the former players in the organization who went to BC soured him on the head coach. I only know what I hear, which is the same things that you hear. I don't know why he did. I mean, my biggest part of my speculation is that two things. One is he didn't feel secure with an organization that has all these new people on top in Jonesy and Danny Briere. And while we really want to believe in him, he didn't have faith in that. And then the second part is that I forget what the second part was.
Maybe he wanted to turn pro, and they
didn't
think he was quite ready yet.
Yeah, he wanted to be on the roster, and they weren't going to guarantee him a roster spot. Thank you for reading my mind. That's exactly
That's why I'm here, Glenn.
Yes.
What I was thinking. I don't know. Here's what I think. Given a really bad situation, they got the best out of it. And they got a player who, may not be the star, perennial all-star that Gauthier may be. Gauthier still hasn't played a game, so we don't know. But this kid Drysdale is ranked really high. It's something that they needed. It's a guy who can quarterback their power play for some years to come. He's very popular with his teammates. He can do a lot of things. And they got a second-round pick. We'll see what that pans out to be. But given a bad situation, I think they made the most of it.
Yeah.
And
Quick
by
question.
the way, Jonesy, who's going to be on the show with Mike Sealski and me tomorrow, just their transparency and their, how they handled it publicly just, again, shows kind of how this Flyers organization is moving forward in a good way.
I thought he and Briere were great the other night, just right out in front of it. Go ahead, Bill.
Me too. Yeah, quick question before you're out the door, Glenn. So you remember 1992, Eric Lindros going back to Quebec to play that game where they were all had the baby pacifiers and everything else.
Binkies.
What's going to be worse? Philadelphia when Cutter Gauthier comes here with the Anaheim Ducks, or Quebec back in 1992?
It's going to be an all-timer. And listen, I know people reference the J.D. Drew thing. Oh, they threw batteries. I was at that game, by the way. There were 2 batteries thrown, and there were 48,000 people in the seats. So the math is 1 battery per 24,000 people. Nobody will, nor should anybody throw anything. But the noise and the signs and everything that's going to face this kid, unfortunately, not till next year because they're not coming back this year, is going to be one of the all-time games. Be there.
Yeah, I want to be fun. It's gonna be fun. All right, Glenn. Tomorrow at 10 with Mike Sealski. You mentioned you have Jonesy, and then on Sunday as well at 10 a.m. Usually with Jody. So we appreciate you giving us a couple minutes today, Glenn. Great insights, man. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Have a great weekend, Rob. Thanks. I'll see you at the shop.
All right, take care. That is Glen Macnow. Appreciate him lending some insight and wisdom there as always. So, Bill, I think your duties you're relieved, man.
I'm getting tagged out. Tone is in the house.
I know Tone's a right-hander or a left-hander, but we're going to the pen. I don't know. He's a righty. I'm told. My sources tell me he's a righty. So, Bill, appreciate it, brother. Keep up the good work, man. Always great chatting with you, man. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Rob. Have a great weekend and go Birds.
You do as well. All right, we'll come back. Tone's going to join us. We got a lot more to dig into when it comes to the Birds. That's for sure. All right. Let me tell you about Jim Murray and Principal Financial Group, because knowing who to trust with your finances can be a real challenge. That's for sure. And I'm right there in the front of the line. But I can tell you from personal experience that somebody that I trust with my finances is Jim Murray and Principal Financial Group, whether it's retirement planning, 401k review, insurance review. You might have a small business. You're trying to get your employee benefits off the ground. That's another resource that Jim can help you with. I've personally entrusted my IRAs, my 401k rollovers with Jim. I couldn't be any happier. You will be too. Give him a call, 610-996-4751, 610-996-4751. You can also email him as well, Murray, MURRAY.Jim@principal.com. That's Murray.Jim@principal.